The topic we're going to speak about is one that affects and touches us all and actually will reveal, I believe, many blind spots that each of us have, including myself. It's called judgmentalism. Judgmentalism. Look in the mirror. When you ask somebody, are you a judgmental person? Very few, there are people who will say yes, but most will not. They'll say, I'm not judgmental. I'm just pointing out a flaw in another person. It's not about me. It's about a higher standard. I want to help the other person. Judgmentalism is something that we don't see necessarily as a compliment, shall we say, to put it mildly, because it suggests a type of almost condescension, that you're putting yourself in the place of being the judge and determining what and how other people should behave. Looking at others, what about judging yourself? And in general, what right do we have to judge anybody? Is that something that is in our domain, something that we were given this right? Figure out how to live your best life, and God bless you. Why are we in judgment? And yet we find that judgmentalism is prevalent, and more than prevalent, it's almost everywhere. Look at our situation today, the polarization of our politics, of our morality even, of people dismissing others. No, you can say dismissing is not necessarily judgment, but it borders on that, because essentially it's about, I know what's right and you don't. But it also crosses over easily into judgment all the time, where we're judging another. And this is true in all circles, especially in religious circles. One of the things that many of us have experienced, and is a big turnoff actually, is this judgment, that you've determined you're holier than thou, and you know what God wants or what religion wants, and you are judging others for not living up to the standards that you have determined. Or you will say, not you determined, God has determined. Even if that is the case, but who put you in the position? There's only one, even from a religious perspective, there's only one judge in heaven. There's one heavenly judge, not all of us, not each of us. And especially considering that we're not perfect ourselves. And how often do we judge others for things that we ourselves are guilty of? So there's an interesting expression. It's an expression from the Talmudic sages. It says that love conceals and covers up, definitely minimizes every flaw. That which you see in another person, even on a minor level, you will not see on yourself, even if it's much more amplified. Because there's something about subjectivity and prejudice that biases us. It blinds us. Hence the word blind spots. I never forget that more than once, but I remember one vivid memory, talking to someone, counseling someone. It was about dating, relationships. And it was very clear to me that he was part of the problem, shall we say. And I asked him just in the middle of nowhere, but say, because he was really trying to convince me that he's doing everything right, then something wrong with her, the person he's dating. So I said to him, let me ask you something. Do you have any blind spots? And he said, yes, I do, without hesitation. But then he added this, but I know what they are. So I said, so maybe it's not a blind spot, because a blind spot means you don't know what it is. He says, why not? For example, you're driving a car, there are blind spots, you know where the blind spots are. So you try to compensate by turning back or getting an extra mirror or whatever it may be. So I said, yes, it's true. There are some blind spots you can identify. But the real blind spots are the ones you can't identify. Why can't you? Because we just don't see ourselves in that objective light. Whereas we look at another person, we will see much more. That's how it is. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as you acknowledge it. Trying to deny that is actually the worst part of it, because then the subjectivity has blinded you to the point you don't even know you're subjective. Someone recuses themselves, let's say, from a given situation because they have an interest, they're a family member, some other way of being biased. That is commendable. because it's recognizing that in this area I may have slanted view, so I just want to be safe. But what happens when you are really subjective, you convince yourself you're not? So that's one component of it. Another element of judgmentalism, of course, that's really disturbing is, and I go back to what I said earlier, if we all become judgmental people, where is the room for compassion? Where's the room for love? Where's the room for perhaps giving someone the benefit of the doubt? Or to use another way of putting it, also from the sages, don't judge someone until you are in that person's shoes, in that person's place. Now, the statement there is not meant to say that once you're in that place, you can judge them. It means don't judge, period, because you're not in that person's shoes. You never know what other people go through. By means of an anecdote, which I believe was a true story, there was a father with a bunch of kids, quite rowdy, and they were traveling. They were traveling on a plane, and they were disturbing everyone around them. The kids were wild. The father couldn't control them. People started getting impatient, started yelling at the father. What's the matter with you? Take care of your children. Like all of us, I want to sleep. You're disturbing. There's nowhere to go because you're on a plane. And some people really got angry. Not only angry, they started saying, what kind of father is this? Judging him, obviously. Until there was one person on the plane who knew what was going on behind the scenes, whispers to one of the passengers, this man just lost his wife just 2 days ago, and they're coming back home after the funeral. The children are orphans. What do you think happened? The word got around the plane. Not only did everyone stop being judgmental and angry, it aroused, it stimulated compassion. The smarter ones obviously did not show it, so they went over and said, maybe I could help. I hope nobody went over and told them, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss and something. Meaning, in other words, just to, in an inappropriate way, An appropriate way, there's a way of saying it as well, just qualifying how we deal with sensitive matters. But what changed? What changed? You suddenly recognize the circumstances. This is just a blatant example. How often is this the case? You judge somebody. You later find out, or you maybe never find out, that perhaps someone went through something that you don't even know about. Does that justify every behavior? Even if it doesn't. But then you say to yourself, you know what? I don't know what person is going through. So let's begin just with that statement. Always assume that something's going on that you're not aware of. There's more than meets the eye. Always assume that. It's a healthy approach. That doesn't mean you tolerate things that are horrendous. If you see a crime or if you see something being done wrong, by all means, speak up. But it doesn't have to have a judgment in it. Why does it have to be personalized? So let's analyze that a bit further. Why do we personalize? Why do we become judgmental? So, obviously there's no one size fits all, but generally speaking, I would submit and suggest has to do with our own insecurities. Our own insecurities. What are our own insecurities? When you yourself are not really confident in your own position, it becomes easy to judge another. As a matter of fact, it's almost a way of covering up. You may not even be doing it consciously or deliberately. It's just part of who we are. It's like why we badmouth other people. In a way, it deflects from us. Why some people have joy when others fail. Not quite the same categories, but the same idea. So judgmentalism is not just talking about, okay, there's something that needs to be corrected. Because then, by all means, figure out a way to correct it. Judgmentalism means it's spilled over now that you are judging another person. You're determining that that person is something wrong with them. And that is coming, I submit, from insecurity. People who are very secure and have that self-esteem, even if they see something that they don't agree with, there's ways you deal with it. They either will state something or they'll look for a productive and constructive way to address it. Judgmentalism is the dismissal of another, is a very, I would say, it's a crime. Is it the greatest crime like murdering someone? In a certain way. What you're doing is undermining and invalidating another person's life. So you'll say, 1 second, but what if the person is really doing something wrong? If they're really doing something wrong and it affects you, So as I said, there are ways to remedy it. Maybe go speak to that person, maybe speak to others. Now, if you're talking about, for example, judgment at Nuremberg, just to use that famous example, we're talking about the Nazis who perpetrated horrible crimes. Yes, we have a system of law and order, but it's not a vigilante. It's not a lynch mob. It's not just anyone you see you feel you don't agree with, you start judging them. There's a due process, and they have a right to defend themselves. We're talking about if everything's done legally and ethically. Judgment is not the judgment of one person judging another. Someone did a crime against humanity or a crime against another. So a system of a moral, ethical system expects accountability, and therefore there's judgment. But it's critical to point out that even then, judgment is not the personal judgment of one over another. It's unfortunate that a human being stooped to that level that did something so painful or so hurtful. So now we need to do something about it as a deterrent, or any other way you explain it, as a way of compensating. But here's an interesting statement in the Bible. When it talks about judgment, there's an expression that says that the judges who's sitting in a court, even in a court of law, I'm not talking now judgment that we do on a daily basis, completely not unwarranted, but even in a court of law, appointed judges, it says the following: you shall judge the community, the people, the nation, and you shall save them. That's the expression. You shall save them. You shall preserve them. So the obvious question is, one second, if they're not guilty, yes, you'll save them. The verdict will be not guilty and they will be acquitted. However, if they are guilty, what do you mean you'll save them? Now they're guilty and they deserve certain consequences. And there's two key answers to this question. Number one, that the whole purpose of judgment is not to sit in judgment of someone. It's to find what is the truth. So your goal always has to be to preserve the truth. When you preserve the truth, you also preserve all the people that are involved in it. The fact that someone did something wrong, when you hold them accountable to it, and you expect more, and if there's necessary, there is a punishment for it, whatever it may have been, all in a fair way with all the proper defense, you're not hurting them, you're saving them. You're saving them from themselves. Because when you hurt another person, or whether it's a monetary disagreement, and when you do discover the truth, if you're able to do so, you're saving both parties. The party that was victorious and the party that lost. Because truth is being defended here. It's not a judgment of the individual, it's a judgment to find clarity of what is right and what is wrong. The second point is this. When a person is held accountable, it actually helps them grow. So, what's the point? When you see somebody doing something wrong, and it could be a child, it can be a friend, it can be a stranger, and you judge them, what you're really doing is not necessarily helping any growth here. You've basically dismissed them and said, look how bad this person is. No, judgmentalism, that's what judgmentalism is. I remember just dealing recently with a situation where a guy's already in his 40s, tells me his mother, any person mentioned at the table, his mother always had some comment. That person, he did this, he did that. It was always judgmental. He says, I had to work years to uproot that from my attitude. It was like this, that was the given. That was the reflexive attitude. Always judging someone. Of course, it's a horrible trait. I wouldn't even call it a trait. It's something we assume we acquire, not something necessarily that we're innate. But getting back to the point, if, however, you're really thinking about what is good and what is right, then you are preserving that person because you are looking for ways to help that person grow. Your child comes home from school, did something really bad, by all accounts. So a true healthy approach is not you ignore it, and not you just judge your child and dismiss and demoralize your child. What you do then is, you sit down your child, I love you deeply. I have such high expectations of you. Something here happened that was not good. We all make our mistakes. But it's because of the love, because of the high expectation. So then the judgment becomes a way of preserving. It's an education. It's teaching someone that you can be better. And you do whatever is required, whether it's reward or deterrence. So preserving is always the goal of judgment. Even when we're talking about legitimate judgment, the goal is always preserving a person, helping someone grow. Sometimes you help them grow by nurturing and feeding them. Sometimes you help them grow by getting rid of the toxins and the weeds that can block us and obfuscate our ability to grow. And one final point. Even though capital punishment, of course, is a whole other discussion, but it's an interesting thing. From the biblical law point of view, capital punishment is allowed, even though it was very rare. But even furthermore, and this is what I want to make the point, it was very rare because it was almost impossible to find the absolute proof necessary to put someone to death. And that was quite deliberate. So here's the interesting thing. If a court ever did put someone to death, they were called a murderous court. Not because they were corrupt and they were bought off or in some way biased, because the mere fact that they could not find merit means they did not fulfill their mandate. What mandate? You shall judge, but you shall preserve. When white blood cells attack a germ or an infection inside the human body, if you didn't know better, it seems very aggressive. But if you know better, it's to preserve. So our attitude has to be, and this is where we have to change our mindset and our heart set. We all have judgmental elements. And I have it as well. Sometimes I see something, my knee-jerk reaction, I have to stop myself and realize this is a very ugly characteristic. Because what benefit is coming from judgment? What benefit is coming out of it besides making you feel good for a second? And as I said, it's usually because of your own shortcomings. What good comes out of one judging another? If you're talking about holding up higher standards, okay, by all means, fight for those standards. Do what it takes. You see someone behaving in a way, maybe go over to them in a gentle, kind way. If that doesn't work, so you know what? It could be something you are unable to correct. But what's the benefit? We have to always look at the benefit. So stopping yourself is vital. And one final thing. The Baal Shem Tov, the great master, the great mystic, once said, he said that every time you see something in another, it's a mirror of yourself. So if you see a flaw in another, you wouldn't have seen it if you didn't have some of it within yourself. That's a pretty strong statement. You'll say, 1 second, I've seen things that are really wrong and I don't have it within myself. In a subtle way. In a subtle way. Why are you shown a flaw or a shortcoming or something that other person is lacking? Is in order for you to repair it within yourself. Now, if you're capable, that will also help repair it within another. Not that you can fix another, but you can make them aware. Very often you get disturbed, we get frustrated, we get annoyed, aggravated by someone else's behavior. Then you step back and say, you know what, I do exactly the same thing. Why is it not bothering you? Because as we said at the outset, because it blinds us. Love, self-love, blinds us. We see the flaws of everyone except our own. We always minimize our own. Now, I know today we have a phenomenon of people who are much harsher on themselves than on others. That deserves to be discussed, but it's out of the scope of this particular conversation. So, my friends, in sum, judgmentalism is where we are personalizing and allowing our own insecurities and our own fears and our own lacks and shortcomings to influence how we look at another. We should be looking at each other as each of us is created in the divine image, pure, innocent. Then life takes over. Things happen. We develop all kinds of attitudes, characteristics, defense mechanisms. Some of them turn out to be very disturbing. So when you see someone else struggling, or you see someone behaving in that type of fashion, you're going to have an inclination to be judgmental, but you have to stop yourself and ask yourself the question, is that going to help the situation or not? Can I look beyond the circumstances and recognize that maybe that person is struggling in a way that I don't fully understand. I remember once being in the airport. You know, the lines, security lines can sometimes be long lines. And people get frustrated and they get the equivalent of road rage. You know, road rage, another phenomenon. So I was standing on line. I mean, there was a woman who seemed to be very, what shall I say, quite obnoxious. She kept on pushing others aside. She says, I was here first. She came to my place and she decided that she was really before me. Now, my initial reaction was, you weren't, lady. I said it to myself. But I saw that she was not going to really be easy to communicate with. And then she says to me, you're a rabbi, right? You should be more sensitive. As if like I did something wrong. I can tell you clearly it had nothing to do with me. But I decided, you know what? What's the point? What's the point? We all have that inclination. What you're pushing your way through? Anyway, I let her in front of me. Trust me, she continued to argue with anybody in her way. Now, I said to myself, you know what? I've been around. Maybe she's having a bad day. Maybe she has a bad life. Maybe she has other challenges. That doesn't give her a right to behave the way she behaved. But I was talking about my experience of it. Why am I being annoyed? Being annoyed because somebody's behaving in a way that's not right. And it affects you. But you have to get yourself out of the picture. Unless, again, you need to defend yourself because you're being hurt. It's another story. A person's in danger. You have to do what it takes. But the word judgment has to be eradicated from our dictionaries, from our feelings. We have no right to judge. We don't want to be judged. Why would we judge others? And it's a good opportunity to look inside our hearts and souls and say, okay, why is it that I dismiss another? Why do I judge another? And sometimes it's a group. And it's usually based on biases and prejudices that don't necessarily have any real standing. It's just something we've acquired. It's one of those unpleasant traits that people develop that do not do anything to bring us closer together. Now, I have my opinions about matters. There are opinions out there today in the political world, in the medical world, and other departments and industries that I adamantly disagree with. I try always to understand why they're saying that. I have my theories, and some of them are quite dismissive, actually, of the other. But I don't judge, I'll tell you why, because I don't know why they got there. It could be they were just brainwashed by their parents or by educators, or they were ignorant and someone manipulated them and they became very, very adamant about positions that are not necessarily tenable and things I totally disagree with. But I don't allow it to become personal for myself. Sometimes I'm able to have a conversation. Sometimes you speak to someone and you're going nowhere. So then you simply say, maybe this is not my mission. This is not my purpose to resolve this issue. If we all become somewhat gentler and kinder and less judgment, we'd be better people and the world would be a better place. And I say it specifically because the environment I grew up in can have sometimes very strong standards, high standards. So of course everyone thinks high standards is synonymous with judgment. No, it's not. You can have very high standards and yet at the same time appreciate and understand and be sensitive to what people go through, how they get to those standards. And we all have to be agents of light, ambassadors of love that help people, even those that we disagree with, grow and help us grow. Judgment never helps that situation. And even when there is a situation where you do need to have judgment, not you and I, in a court of law, it also needs to be saturated with a goal of finding the deeper love, even among the thorns, the rose among the thorns. So I hope this was meaningful. I hope this gives you some food for thought. It's important to look at ourselves in the mirror. And as such, I believe we'll all become less judgmental. And maybe we can eliminate it altogether. Thank you very much for being here. This has been Simon Jacobson, Meaningful Live. Please go to meaningfullife.com for a robust schedule of programs and events that cover the gamut, the spectrum of life. Stay well, stay healthy, stay in touch, share, like, all the different tools that create a synergy, a form of cross-pollination. Thank you again. Be well.